August 1230, before Christio, a Roman guard standing outside a locked stone room in Alexandria. Inside that room is Cleopatra the Seventh, Queen of Egypt, Pharaoh, descendant of the Ptolemies, the most powerful woman in the ancient world. She's been locked in there for 7 days. You can hear her sometimes, not crying, not screaming, just moving around. The soft sound of footsteps on stone, the rustle of fabric, sometimes talking to someone. But you know for certain she's alone. In there. Here's what you need to understand about Cleopatra's death before we go any further. Everything you think you know is wrong. The romantic story of the asp hidden in the basket of figs, probably made up. The image of Cleopatra dying peacefully in her royal bed surrounded by her handmaidens, definitely made up. What actually happened? In those locked rooms between August 1st and August 12th, 30 before Christ, was something far more planned out, far more cruel, and far more revealing about how Rome destroyed its enemies. This isn't a story about suicide. It's a story about a planned psychological operation designed to break the last pharaoh of Egypt before killing her. The question you should be asking isn't how Cleopatra died. It's why Octavian needed her to die the specific way she did, and why he needed those 10 days to make it happen. If you believe that understanding how power operates at its most calculated deserves to be remembered, consider subscribing. Your support helps us expose the mechanisms of control that shaped ancient civilizations in ways romantic histories refuse to admit. Let me show you what really happened in Cleopatra's last 10 days alive. Act 1. The destruction began on August 1st, 30 before Christ in the tomb Cleopatra had built for herself. Picture the scene. Mark Antony is dying. He's just fallen on his own sword after receiving false reports that Cleopatra was already dead. Except she isn't dead. She's locked herself inside her tomb with her 2 most loyal handmaidens, and all the treasure she can carry. The tomb is a stone building near the temple of Isis. 2 stories, massive wooden doors, no windows, built like a fortress, because Cleopatra understood that in death she needed the same security she had in life. Antony is bleeding out at the foot of the tomb. His men are begging Cleopatra to open the doors. She won't, can't risk it. Octavian's soldiers are minutes away, according to the historian Plutarch, who interviewed people who were present. Cleopatra and her 2 handmaidens used ropes to pull Antony up through a window on the 2nd floor, hold him up while he was dying, his blood dripping down the stone walls. Think about that image. The Queen of Egypt pulling her dying lover through a window because she's too terrified to open her own door. Antony died in her arms on the 2nd floor of that tomb. His last words, recorded by Plutarch: "Don't pity me for this last turn. Of fate, I was the greatest Roman of them all. I am only defeated by another Roman. He died believing his life had meaning." That's important. Cleopatra had maybe 10 minutes to grieve before Octavian's soldiers arrived. Here's where the story gets interesting. Octavian didn't storm the tomb, didn't break down the doors, didn't force his way in. He sent a messenger, a man named Gaius Procolius. The message was simple. Caesar wishes to discuss terms for your surrender and the future of your children. Cleopatra refused to open the door, spoke to Procolius through a gap in the stone. Said she'd only negotiate if Octavian promised her children's safety. While she was talking, Procalius's men were climbing the walls, the same window they'd pulled Antony through just hours before. Octavian's soldiers came through it. They took her by surprise, grabbed her before she could react. Cleopatra tried to stab herself, actually got a dagger from somewhere in her clothing, but the soldiers were ready for it. Tackled her, took it away from her. According to Dio Cassius's account, Cleopatra screamed at them, "You will not take me alive to Rome. You will not parade me. Kill me now." The soldiers had specific orders. Keep her alive. Use whatever force necessary, but do not let her die. They carried her out of the tomb, took her to the palace, put her in a locked chamber on the second floor. That was August 1st, the day the destruction actually began. Here's what you need to understand about Octavian's plan. He didn't just want Cleopatra dead. He needed something specific from her death, and that specific thing required time. Think about Octavian's position. He just conquered Egypt. The wealthiest kingdom in the ancient world was now his. But back in Rome, he had a problem. He'd been fighting a civil war, Romans killing Romans. He needed to justify all that bloodshed to the Roman people. Needed to transform a civil war into something else, something easier to accept. A war against a foreign enemy. A war against the dangerous foreign queen who'd seduced Mark Antony and nearly destroyed Rome. But here's the problem. Cleopatra wasn't some barbarian queen. She was sophisticated, educated, politically brilliant. She'd been to Rome. She spoke Latin. She'd met with senators. She'd negotiated with Cicero. Romans knew she wasn't a simple villain. She was complicated, and complicated enemies don't make good propaganda. Octavian needed to simplify. Her needed to transform her from a political enemy into a symbol. The Eastern temptress, the Egyptian witch, the foreign corruption that had to be eliminated to save Rome. And most importantly, he needed to parade her through Rome in his triumph. Needed the Roman people to see the dangerous queen defeated, humiliated, broken. Triumphs had a formula. The defeated enemy, king or queen, was led through Rome in chains, displayed to the crowd, humiliated publicly. And then, at the end of the parade, they were traditionally executed in the Tullianum prison. This was how Rome celebrated victory, with ritualized degradation of the conquered. Octavian's entire political future depended on that triumph, on parading Cleopatra through Rome as proof of his victory over the East. But Cleopatra knew that formula too. She'd seen triumphs. She'd been in Rome in 44 before Christ during Caesar's Gallic triumph. She'd watched as Vercingetorix, the Gallic king, paraded through the streets and then strangled to death in the Tullianum. She knew exactly what Octavian had planned for her, and she would rather die than let it happen. That's what made those 10 days necessary. Octavian needed Cleopatra alive to take back to Rome. Cleopatra was determined to die before he could parade her. Two wills in complete opposition. 10 days to resolve the conflict. Here's how Octavian approached the problem. The chamber where they held Cleopatra was specifically chosen. Second floor of the palace. One door, one window too small for a person to fit through. Guards outside 24 hours a day. Everything potentially dangerous removed. No knives, no daggers, no ropes, no sharp objects of any kind. According to Plutarch, they even searched her clothing and hair every day, checked for hidden weapons, poison, anything she might use to kill herself. Cleopatra was stripped of everything except her basic clothing and placed in an empty stone room. But Octavian's strategy went beyond simple imprisonment. He needed to do something more sophisticated. He needed to break her will to die. Think about the psychology. Cleopatra wanted death because death meant dignity. Death meant she controlled her own fate. Death meant Octavian couldn't parade her through Rome, so Octavian had to make her want to live, had to give her a reason to choose survival over suicide. He used her children. Cleopatra had 4 children. Caesarion, her son, with Julius Caesar, was 17. The 3 younger children, twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, aged 10, and young Ptolemy, aged 6, were from Mark Antony. Octavian's men separated them from their mother immediately, took them to different parts of the palace, kept them on the guard. On August 2nd, the day after Cleopatra's capture, Octavian sent his messenger again. Not Proculius this time, a man named Gaius Cornelius Gallus, poet, soldier, diplomat. The message was elegant in its cruelty. Caesar wishes you to know that your children are being well cared for. Their future depends entirely on your cooperation. Should anything happen to you, Caesar cannot guarantee their safety. Caesarion in particular is in a very dangerous position. You understand why. Cleopatra understood perfectly. Caesarion was Julius Caesar's son. That made him a potential rival to Octavian, who'd built his entire claim to power on being Caesar's adopted heir. If Cleopatra died, Caesarion would have no protection. Octavian would kill him. But if Cleopatra lived, if she cooperated, if she agreed to be part of Octavian's triumph, maybe Caesarion would be spared. Maybe all her children would be spared. Here's the sophistication of the trap. Octavian gave Cleopatra a reason to live that contradicted her reason to die. Her dignity demanded death. Her children demanded life. For the next 10 days, that's the space Cleopatra existed in, the impossible choice between dignity and motherhood. Act 2, the destruction, was about measurement. On August 3rd, Octavian sent architects to Cleopatra's chamber. They came with measuring tools, ropes marked with increments, wax tablets for notes. They measured her height, approximate weight, dimensions of her body. According to Plutarch's account, based on testimony from one of Cleopatra's handmaidens who survived, the queen asked them what they were doing. Preparing for Caesar's triumph, one architect answered. The display must be properly constructed to accommodate you. Think about the psychological impact of that moment. They were measuring her like a piece of furniture, like an object to be displayed right in front of her, making it real, making it inevitable. The architects weren't just gathering measurements. They were delivering a message. This is happening. You're going to Rome. You're going to be paraded through the streets. We're building the cage right now. They came back every day. August 4th, August 5th, August 6th. Each day, more measurements, more details. Questions about what she'd wear, what jewelry would be most recognizable to Roman audiences, whether she'd be in chains or simply under guard. They discussed it in front of her debated the aesthetics of her humiliation like it was an artistic project. Here's what makes this especially cruel. Octavian wasn't just planning the triumph. He was using the planning to break Cleopatra psychologically, making her live with the concrete reality of what awaited her. Not an abstract threat, a specific, detailed, measured plan. Every day the architects came, they made suicide more attractive, made death seem like a better option than the humiliation being prepared for her. But every day, Octavian also sent reports about her children. Caesarion asked, "After you today he's worried. He needs his mother. Pull her toward death with the horror of the triumph. Pull her toward life with concern for her children. Create an impossible psychological space where every option is unbearable." Act 3, the destruction, was isolation. Cleopatra was alone in that chamber. Her two handmaidens who'd been with her in the tomb, Iris and Charmian, were kept in separate rooms. She could hear them sometimes, their voices, but couldn't speak to them. No one to talk to, no one to plan with, no one to share the burden of that impossible choice. According to Dio Cassius, Cleopatra asked repeatedly to see her children, was denied every time. Not until Caesar is certain of your cooperation. But she could hear them. The palace walls were stone and sound carried. Sometimes she'd hear the younger children playing, the sound of their laughter drifting through. The window too small to climb through. Think about the torture of that. Hearing your children, knowing they're nearby, not being able to reach them, not knowing if they're truly okay or if the sounds are staged to manipulate you. Modern psychological warfare would call this learned helplessness. Strip someone of agency, remove their choices, make them dependent on their captor for even basic information about their loved ones. Octavian was conducting a masterclass in breaking someone's will. By August 7th, according to Plutarch, Cleopatra had stopped eating, refused food when the guards brought it, just sat in her chamber. Staring at the stone walls, the guards reported this to Octavian immediately. Here's what's fascinating. Octavian's response wasn't to force her to eat. It was to bring Caesarion. For the first time in 6 days, Cleopatra saw her oldest son. The meeting was brief, supervised, guards present the entire time. But Plutarch records what Caesarion said to his mother: "Please eat. Please take care of yourself. I need you. We all need you." Then the guards took him away. That night, Cleopatra ate. Here's what that tells us. Octavian understood exactly how to manipulate her, knew precisely which levers to pull. The threat to her children wasn't abstract anymore. It was Caesarion's voice, Caesarion's plea. How do you choose death when your son is begging you to live? Act 4 was negotiation. On August 8th, Octavian came himself. First time he'd spoken directly to Cleopatra since her capture. He came alone, except for guards outside the door. We don't have a complete record of what was said, but we have pieces from various sources. Plutarch, who interviewed survivors, Dio Cassius, who had access to Roman archives, Strabo, who was in Alexandria shortly after these events. The negotiation went like this. Octavian offered a deal. Participate willingly in the triumph. Walk through. Rome under your own power, not in chains. Maintain some dignity in defeat. In exchange, your children live. All of them including Caesarion. They'll be raised in Rome as wards of the state, educated, protected, given futures, refuse, and dies the day you die. The younger children might survive, might not. Octavian made no promises. Cleopatra asked for time to consider. Octavian gave her 3 days. After that, we sail for Rome, with or without your cooperation. Choose. Think about the genius of this offer. Octavian wasn't giving Cleopatra a way out. He was giving her a way to rationalize surrender, a way to tell herself that living through humiliation served a higher purpose. Protecting her children, it was a lie, of course. Octavian was going to kill Caesarion no matter what Cleopatra did. The boy was too dangerous to leave alive, but Cleopatra didn't know that yet. For 3 days, she existed in that space between hope and despair. Act 5 was the breaking point. August 11th, 30 before Christ. Something changed. We don't know exactly what. The historical sources are unclear, fragmented. But something happened that made Cleopatra realize the truth. Maybe she overheard guards talking. Maybe someone loyal to her managed to get a message through. Maybe she just understood Octavian well enough to see through the lie. However it happened, by August 11th, Cleopatra knew that Caesarion was going to die. That all the negotiation, all the cooperation, all the hope, it was theater. Octavian was going to kill her son regardless of what she did. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra requested permission to visit Antony's tomb, wanted to make offerings, honor his memory before the journey to Rome. It was a reasonable request. Octavian granted it. They took her to the tomb under heavy guard, led her inside for 1 hour, watched her make offerings, watched her pray, watched her pour libations over the place where Antony had died. The guards didn't see her palm, the small clay vial hidden in the tomb's wall, didn't notice her slip it into her clothing when they brought her back to her chamber. She asked for a meal, specifically requested figs, fresh figs from the market. The guards checked the basket of figs carefully when it arrived, looked for hidden weapons, poison, anything dangerous. They saw fruit, only fruit. They let it through. Here's what should be said about the snake. The story that Cleopatra had an asp, an Egyptian cobra, hidden in the basket of figs became the popular version. It's dramatic, it's symbolic. The cobra was a symbol of Egyptian royalty, but several ancient historians, including Strabo Dow, the snake story. The timeline doesn't quite work. The symptoms described don't quite match cobra venom, and snakes are notoriously unreliable methods of suicide. What makes more sense based on the evidence is that Cleopatra had obtained poison earlier, had hidden it in Antony's tomb during the days she'd spent locked in there, retrieved it during her final visit. The exact method matters less than what happened next. August 12th, 30 before Christ, early morning. The guards heard nothing unusual from Cleopatra's chamber. No screams, no sounds of struggle, just silence. At around the 3rd hour, they opened the door to bring breakfast. Cleopatra was dead, lying on a golden couch, dressed in her royal clothes. Her 2 handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, were with her. Iris was already dead at the foot of the couch. Charmian was dying, arranging the crown on Cleopatra's head with her last strength. According to Plutarch, one guard asked Charmian, "Was this well done?" Charmian's last words, extremely well, and has become the descendant of so many kings. Then she died. Cleopatra was 39 years old. Here's what you need to understand about this death. It wasn't a suicide of despair. It was a final act of control. Octavian had spent 10 days trying to break Cleopatra's will, trying to make her choose life so he could parade her through Rome, trying to use her love for her children to make her surrender her dignity. Cleopatra's death was her refusal, her final message. You can take my kingdom, you can kill my children, but you cannot take my choice. You cannot parade me, you cannot have that victory. She died on her own terms, dressed as a queen, surrounded by the trappings of power that Octavian was trying to strip from her. But here's the final cruelty. Octavian won. Anyway, he couldn't parade the real Cleopatra, so he built a substitute, a statue, an effigy. During his triumph in Rome, a massive figure of Cleopatra with a snake attached to her arm was carried through the streets. The Roman crowd saw Cleopatra in Octavian's triumph, saw her defeated, saw her with a symbolic asp. Octavian wanted them to see. The propaganda worked. The image of Cleopatra as the exotic Egyptian seductress who died from a snake bite became the version that lasted 2,000 years, and Caesarion, despite everything Cleopatra died to protect, Octavian had him murdered. 3 weeks later, sent assassins to intercept him as he fled toward India, killed him on the road. Julius Caesar's only biological son, aged 17, throat cut in the Egyptian desert. The younger children survived, were paraded in Octavian's triumph instead of their mother, lived in Rome as wards of Octavian's sister, given limited futures, watched constantly, never allowed to return to Egypt. Cleopatra died believing her sacrifice might save them, died believing that her choice to control her death rather than participate in Octavian's triumph was an act of dignity. In reality, Octavian got everything he wanted: the propaganda victory, the image of Cleopatra defeated, the elimination of political threats, the conquest of Egypt. Cleopatra's death brought nothing except the manner of her dying. Here's what those 10 days reveal about power at its most systematic. Octavian didn't just want to defeat Cleopatra. He wanted to break her psychologically first, wanted to use her love for her children as a weapon against her will to die with dignity. He constructed an impossible choice. Dignity or children made her live for 10 days in that impossibility, measured her for her humiliation, showed her exactly what awaited in Rome, then offered false hope that cooperation might save her children. It was a machine, every element calculated, every pressure point identified, every moment designed to strip her of agency until surrender seemed rational. And when it didn't work, when Cleopatra chose death anyway, Octavian just built a statue and paraded that instead. That's real power, not the ability to kill, the ability to control the narrative even when your enemy denies you the satisfaction of their living. Humiliation, if this exposed the psychological mechanisms of how ancient powers operated when defeating enemies wasn't enough. They needed to break them first. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're going to keep uncovering how systematic destruction functioned in the ancient world. Drop a comment with your thoughts on how Cleopatra's choice in death was both a victory and a defeat, and I'll see you in the next investigation into what happened when power had no limits and history was written by the victors, who knew how to manipulate truth, stand in Alexandria today. The tomb where Cleopatra died is gone. The palace where she spent her last 10 days is underwater, victims of earthquakes and time. The only things that remain are the stories and the question of whether Cleopatra's final act was triumph or tragedy. She chose death over humiliation, but Octavian paraded her image anyway. She died to protect her children, but Caesarion died 3 weeks later. She controlled the manner of her death, but not the story that came after. Those 10 days between August 1st and August 12th reveal something essential about power and agency. Sometimes the only choice left is how you lose. Sometimes dignity costs everything and buys nothing except the knowledge that you were the one who made the choice. Cleopatra died a queen, but she died in a sealed stone room, alone except for 2 handmaidens, having failed to save her kingdom or her children, having succeeded only in denying Octavian the satisfaction of parading her living body through Rome. Whether that was enough, whether that mattered, is a question that echoes across 2,000 years. Remember those 10 days? Remember what Octavian built. A psychological machine designed to break the last pharaoh of Bigi before her death. Remember how close it came to working, and remember why Cleopatra chose death anyway. Not because it saved anything, because it was the only choice Octavian couldn't take from her. That's what those last days were. Not romance, not drama, just the systematic destruction of agency and one woman's refusal to let it be complete.